today's webinar.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Thank you very much. Nice to see everyone joining today. So thank you for joining me today. And great to see all the weather reports. It seems humid and muggy and things. So let's see if we can sort of lift spirits and maybe improve the weather through the next 45 minutes or so. But thanks for joining us for this dramatically titled Millennials Beat Performance Appraisals to Death with Continuous Feedback. It was a bit of fun we were having as we thought about a lot of the reports in various HR magazines and publications and business publications and the like, which were talking very much about the death of performance appraisals and the imminent demise. And we sort of mused on that, and it just had us thinking more about that and said, look, is this true? Is it, it's something at the very core of what we do. As Boland, and so we just started to investigate. We started to look into this. We started to think about our own experiences. We started to talk to our own clients and the organisations we work with, who are very diverse and varied. So we were able to sort of draw in a lot of information, and we wanted to just then say, well, what are we seeing? And so today is very much about sharing some of our thoughts and insights, which will hopefully feed into your own around this topic, be that the millennials issue, be that performance appraisals and what you're wrestling with there to revamp that, or maybe it's this topic of continuous feedback, this term that you might be hearing lots of within your own organisations and outside of them. And so we wanted to feed into your thoughts by sharing our own, but in turn, hopefully invite some comment from yourselves, so you might throw more light on where we're at and how we're sort of coming to this topic. So broadly, I wish to talk about the current topics that are relevant to this arena of performance management. Then I want to turn our attention to the new audience for all of this, which is millennials, because that seemed important, because that was a key change in the workplace that we saw as we come to investigate the topic in a bit more detail. And millennials, I'm kind of catching that sort of spanning the ages of roughly 20 through to early 30s, that kind of definition, with ourselves, certainly myself being Generation X, which sounds very glamorous, but obviously isn't, just means I'm old. And then to consider the impact of this convergence of millennials and what's being said around appraisals and feedback, and bring that together to see what the impact is in the workplace. And that will then be before we start to suggest maybe some simple ways to ensure that performance management then is delivering successfully with this new audience in mind. And we're going to top that off with a thought on continuous feedback and technology. So hopefully that's whetted the appetite, and we'll get started. So let me move on a slide. We kind of recognized as we went into this topic a dichotomy. Of sorts, in our mind, there was lots of information suggesting appraisals are dead in the water, feedback methods are not improving performance, etc. And at the same time, we saw people, new generation, if you will, millennials, appearing in the workplace who are ideally primed to respond well to good performance management, appraisals, and who want that feedback if it's correctly delivered. So there seem to be these things at odds with each other slightly, and of course that allowed us to then start as a starting point. That was a starting point for our investigation. So we then started to say, well, what are some of the topics that are relevant here to this area of performance management? And we started with just some of the thoughts that came out of neuroscience and other well-researched kind of topics, areas in this realm, about how the brain reacts to feedback and appraisals. And it was finding, and was put forward, that a lot of it runs counter to delivering those desired performance improvements. SCARF at the side there is probably something which many of you may recognize as prominent work of David Rock, who introduced the SCARF model, and it focuses on those 5 social domains in which you can trigger a reward or a threat response. Now, I'm not going to go into this model in too much detail. There are already some great webinars on this topic, such as those from Jan Hills, on this very forum. So do check those out if you want to go deeper into this. But it's really interesting work, and it's worthy of note as we think about then how we might start to conduct appraisals and feedback better in the future. So I'll quickly run through those dimensions, though, because that might be useful for us just to sort of build on our learning in this area. So status, all about the relative importance to others, and you can easily trigger a threat response in this domain by conventional workplace practices such as performance appraisals and feedback, particularly if the feedback is felt to be threatening and not delivered in a way which can be used to boost someone's status. There's a real opportunity to use feedback to keep on dropping in even the small noted things to help build someone's interpersonal and personal feeling of status in the organisation. Certainty, just that desire to have some stability, predictability in certain aspects or dimensions of life, of work. Autonomy, the ability to exert control over one's environment or even have some subtle perception that is in place. And of course, there's some constraints within organisations, but we can still give some control to people that plays well for them. Relatedness, all about feeling connected to a social group. That's where trust and empathy abound. And fairness, and again, a real key one. If people perceive unfairness, it really can erode that trust. So again, there's real implications here. If performance grades, for example, forced distribution are in place, because they can play directly into this sense of something being fair or not. So it's interesting for us to have in mind, and we'll refer back to it later on. Other key current topic is just the idea of the stories coming through from technology firms, consulting firms, prominent organisations that were sort of, not peddling, but actually putting forward the story that performance appraisals were just about to suffer an imminent demise. And some of that was being put forward by firms who were offering alternatives and saying, look, don't do that, do this. But what we were seeing, actually, if you went under the headlines a little bit deeper, actually the kind of stories that were coming out from people like Deloitte and Accenture and KPMG and the like weren't so much. There was some sort of seemingly move away from annual appraisals, but it was much more an away from forced distribution and performance grades. And that was more actually what was being dispensed with, rather than the idea that there was still some moment where people came together at an interim point or an end of year point to review the year, to review and reflect and learn. So it was less that, it was more those latter 2 points. But then in its place, what people were saying is, look, they were moving towards the idea of discretionary reward, this concept of maybe like a reward pot, if you want, that line managers are in charge of, or have responsibility for, and just ensuring they have good education and training such that they can make that discerning judgment around their people by knowing them well, as much as anything. And of course, that meant that there was this desire for them to then have regular feedback conversations in place, check-ins, touch points, all different manners of ways of describing these kind of feedback conversations. And it's that underlying idea of continuous feedback happening. So there's a move towards that being noted. And people getting much more targeted then in that feedback. So they would be asking questions that were very relevant to role. So if someone was in projects or discrete projects, then the questions would be tailored to that, which might be very different to someone in more of a transactional environment, a contact center or something like that. So not long, quite punchy, specific questions, but on a regular basis. So that was the kind of sort of the next topic that we saw sort of coming to the fore. Then you come to technology. This march of technology, predominantly through mobile apps, kind of following the social media trends. So that was leading lots of software vendors to be pushing out then app-based feedback services. And those topics just had us then thinking further. So look, it's a real kind of mixed picture that we felt was emerging. There was a cry to kill performance appraisals by, trend-setting technology firms, whilst there was a rush to fulfill the desire of millennials who were requiring more feedback. And we started to feel there's a chance actually that we could be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We don't think these things are mutually exclusive. We don't think we need to do that. before I move on to the next part, then to say how our thoughts then started to form off the back of that analysis of current topics. I thought I'd offer up a quick poll before we move on. I'm going to ask Richard to... No, that's the wrong poll, Richard. No, take that one away. Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, we were having a bit of fun with you there. We just thought 23rd of June, we had to say something. Don't vote on that one, please. Save your X for the boxes in the voting booths and ballot centres. Right, so it's this. Has your organisation stopped or is considering stopping an annual performance grade? So I talked earlier just about that idea that actually they were disappearing. That was actually true. Not so much the annual appraisals, but certainly grading and distribution was we were seeing sort of being pushed to one side a little more. And this is really interesting. So so we're seeing there that play out almost akin to the referendum. Almost 50-50. This is paper thin, but really interesting nonetheless. Okay, so the no's have a slight head on that. So really interesting. And again, it is for us interesting that we wonder what that figure might have looked like as we were maybe 3 to 5 years ago. I suspect it would have been considerably different, maybe 75 to 25. But certainly that seems to bear out to us that we're seeing much more people now getting to a point where they are saying, look, we can do this differently, and seeing grades be one of the first things that they start to look at in detail. And we have a lot of conversations about grading and rating scales and the like, and what will work in that particular organisation, whether they should retain them. Great, thank you for voting. Thanks, Richard. I'll take that one away. So let's just... Shall I close that one, Richard? Close, probably.
It should be gone.
There we go. That's good. That's great.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's bring our attention now to the new audience, millennials. Of course, again, what we're seeing there then is HR departments wishing to attract and develop and retain this segment, this generation of people coming into the workplace, who obviously with their age range are now often forming the basis of junior staff positions, junior management positions, and some middle management positions. And they have an eye on leadership positions. So HR must recognise the different aims and demands they have compared to, say, the leaders who came before or who are in place now. In relation to this topic, though, it's crucially of interest to us. It's their desire for and comfort with feedback. We were noting it much more readily as we started to run focus groups or having design sessions as we came to revamp performance management processes, whereby the current crop of leaders or management might sort of put it further down their list of necessaries, whereas we saw then much more junior people coming through and saying, no, absolutely, we want every opportunity to have feedback in place because we recognise the value of it. And there was something about sometimes you'd see line managers kind of in that, seeing that thirst for feedback as needy. But in our experience, that's absolutely not the case. I think millennials are seeing it just simply as a great way to develop, hence they value it and they want it. There's a little bit of that, and that wasn't like it in my day. I just got on with my job, and I didn't need a pat on the back for everything I did. And something of that mindset is shifting, but certainly doesn't exist in the millennial generation as we would see it. Coming through, so just pick up on the technology point again, because it's relevant to the millennials, I think. But at the same time, millennials coming in, very comfortable with technology, accessing and consuming multimedia at the same time. What we might feel is distracting to them is the norm. I can probably ask if anyone out there as young adults or young children of a certain teenager plus age or whatever can recognise that they watch TV, they read an iPad whilst responding to social media on the phone. So if that's familiar, I suspect there might be some wry smiles there. So we have this idea of a Facebook generation seeking and gaining likes instantly, and that is driving a change in behaviour and desire for feedback. But we do think that the desire is coming from something deeper than that. And if we understand this, we might be able to put in place processes that satisfy that need at its core, and not just use technology to seemingly respond to those social media trends. So, Richard, I just had a thing which may have timed me out on those slides, but I'm okay on the, obviously people can still hear me and no doubt still viewing slides. So I'm assuming I am okay. You're still hearing me? Okay.
Yeah, you're still here.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you need me to move the slides, just tell me on to the next slide.
Okay. Well, actually, yes. If you could move us on now, there should be a slide now. The next slide will be about old school, new school.
That's cool. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, that's great. So, again, I'm playing with words here. Old school, new school. I'm distinctly old school. There's something in my school university experience which has shaped my attitudes to the workplace or in the workplace. So undoubtedly, the school and university experiences then of this next generation will shape their attitudes as well as they come in. So I had grades, I had expectation of high grades. People wanted A's, not B's. People wanted firsts, not 2 1s, etc. 4-point averages if you're in the US, nothing less. And so certainly the current crop of leaders, again, those people who are risen through, will have that. There'll have been no doubt sort of have those expectations that in the workplace they'd be disappointed with a midpoint grade or even a B, A or nothing less. And sometimes we'll often work with organisations who are revamping their approach to performance management, and they'll tell of how managers might then, in that context, that process, it might inflate grades. They'll have bell distribution curves that become compressed, and moderation becomes a slightly cynical exercise as people are just trying to push people one way or the other to make that grading idea work. So if we consider then new schooling methods, and this is certainly no argument for one schooling methodology over another, old school or new school. It's simply an observation that we, Generation X, is having a different experience at school and university that we take into the workplace as distinct to this next generation coming through. So, and you may recognize some of this new school stuff through your own children. There appears much more clarity in what is looked for in a student. These concepts of so what I am looking for, what are the learning outcomes, or what's the learning today? It's coming through learning outcomes themselves, much more clearly defined. You would see in kind of in schooling and in education, but from our perspective, and importantly, there is far more feedback and commentary. Not just from teachers, but from fellow students too. So you get this peer feedback coming into play as well. School books more likely to have commentary on what's been done well, what they should do differently, a quest to respond to that feedback. So new norms emerging. Again, my school book probably was lucky to have a little score out of 10 with a circle around it and a couple of scribbles in between. So much more information is being presented to students. So that new norm is emerging. Children are becoming used to that, becoming used to the feedback that tells them what they're doing right, and they like that. They still have targets that they want to have that help them clarify what they need to deliver. And they see critical feedback as just something that's going to help them get there. So it's a very different mindset that we were thinking is starting to impact then on the workplace. Again, Richard. Oh, here we go. No, I'm back in. There we go. So let me advance myself. And again, I'll just catch some comments. Definitely the old school educator's experience. That's great. And 23, does that make me a millennial? Yes, I think it does. Yeah. I just got that one from earlier. Excellent. So what's happening in the workplace then? So we feel it is being felt in the workplace in different ways, and we see this. Again, just offering this up very openly to say, look, so we're seeing a natural, more positive response to feedback, less fear, much less fear around it. I think an expectation that people will give it, and that people will ask for it. So it's just very different there. That they would see it as lazy almost, as they might do a teacher that doesn't give them the feedback they want. They just think, well, that's just the teacher not doing their job. So they really have an expectation that they will get that, and a frustration if they don't. And in that regard, then you have just this different attitude of employees who understand that feedback is helpful. And as I say, from that point earlier, just a real lack of fear in receiving the feedback, peer feedback, importantly as well, and in giving it. And we're seeing a lot more of 360-degree feedback, peer feedback, being drawn more readily into performance management as just a key element of it. And that wouldn't have been the case maybe, again, 5 years ago. It's much more coming in now as something that's just seen as just good practice and being drawn much more closely to the performance appraisal. I just pause at that point then, just maybe ask people to maybe just pause on this slide and throw that out there. Just, are you seeing this too? Do you see something of what we've described manifesting itself in the workplace in some of these ways here? I know we have a real mix of people, we have a real mix of sectors and organisations. You can if I just ask that question, say, look, please type away. Tell me, what do you see? Are you seeing one thing over another? Does this chime with your own experience? So in the younger generation, experience, there is a desire for feedback. The response is not always positive. It depends on the emotional intelligence of the individual. Which is interesting stuff. I think this is it. It's done well. I think there is a positive response to this, and so that means there is it's more demanding on us as line managers and leaders to make sure we do it right. Gen Y, seeking more feedback more often. However, Gen managers, ex-managers not comfortable. Great, which is, again, a great distinction. Just starting to see that schism that sort of has opened up slightly between Gen X managers' capability and confidence to that sort of thirst for it on the part of Gen Y. Difficult to tell for the youngest person in an organisation there. So some recognition of this. And we just think this is going to build. I mean, the impact of this is going to build, and how it's going to be felt is going to build. I get a lot of requests for feedback from people who submit CVs, which is excellent, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. It's not enough. Why did I get the job? Why didn't I get the job? That's less so. I'm not going to be able to get to all of these, but please do sort of take these in yourselves as well. There's some interesting stuff. I was once asked a question in an interview about feedback that I didn't like. Okay, that's interesting. My response was that I don't have any examples of that, as all feedback is constructive. Okay, so again, some sense of actually people saying, look, there's value in this feedback. Sometimes they might not like the style in which it's delivered, and it might be sort of offered forward as it were, critical or whatever, but Gen Y can see it as all being potentially constructive if they can make sense and use of it. Line managers lacking confidence and skills, absolutely. We're seeing this to some degree. Another comment there. In some ways, this comes through a desire for better emphasis on career development, which is a really interesting point as well. I think it goes back to the slide earlier that there is a real idea that for them to progress effectively and fulfill their career aspirations, that feedback is critical. They need to know where they stand, and they need to know what they're doing well, and they need to get leverage off of that feedback. That's great. Thank you. Keep that coming. Again, it's quite nice to see that build, even whilst I'm sort of chatting through some of this stuff, to just see, so you can share with each other some of your own experiences and insights as well. So, if I could ask you, Richard, maybe advance the slide then. We should be coming to something which is almost breathing life back into performance management, almost as a starting point for what we see may be a way to respond to all of this. So we believe, first of all, that simply having all the elements of a robust performance management process in place can really work, can really help you respond to this effectively. So if you look at this, you'll start to see things here where there is nothing new here, but our experience is that it's rare that we see all these elements in place, and certainly in place and well executed. So we would sort of argue that you need to start at the very top and say, look, what are we trying to achieve here? What do we want from a performance management process? Why do we have it? What are the aims of the process? Is it to assess? Is it to evaluate? Is it a more holistic performance management process that is genuinely there to help people improve their performance and develop? Is it there to serve career development? So that kind of high-level discussion is tremendously useful, because it then informs your decisions, the detailed decisions when you get to them, that you can look back up at the principles and the aims that have been set out in that high-level conversation. And then you're just into, as we would see it, just putting in place just a robust performance management process, which is to say, look, you need to have clear objectives set that are reviewed regularly. And allowed to be modified and take things in as situations change, new things come to light. And so that means that you have to be having that regular contact with an employee, regular meaningful conversations, as we would say, that reflect on the objectives, take in what's new information that might amend those or have those be amended. And then think about it as to how you can have those conversations which can consider where people are doing things well and what they can build upon. So a kind of a strengths-based or strengths-focused approach to those conversations can be very productive, can be very motivational, and keep building on that to say, look forward rather than back. What should we do next? What should we do more of, rather than what just happened, and looking back and just evaluating it and then just ending the conversation there. So we recognize that meaningful conversations, having set the objectives, have regular feedback conversations. They may lead into coaching conversations. Again, we would see that as part of one of the cyclical two-way conversations that should form part of performance management. And then a performance appraisal should be then one of those, but one of a series of those two-way conversations. And again, it has a distinct purpose as well. It's about reflection and learning. If we come forward, that next one. Yep. So, and of course, a lot of emphasis should be given to development and training. That has then is cognizant of the objectives, is cognizant of career aspirations, to the point earlier about, a real focus on career development becomes important, and really is seeking to help the individuals achieve their aims and goals. I think we always have a philosophy that if you do right by the individual, the organisation will get everything it wants if you do right by the individual. Reward, obviously, then there's a method of reward that is fit for purpose. Is transparent and focuses on reward rather than coercion. The distinction there is to say, obviously, that you could go one way, which is to say, if you don't do this, you won't get this reward. Or you can go the way of, well done, that was great work, here is a reward. And you can come back to that being a method whereby some discretionary judgment is given on part of the manager in that respect. And it's down to them, and you devolve that responsibility much more down to them rather than following some HR process or like. And talking of process, of course, then there's still that need to have a simple process at play. But try and keep it light. Try and keep it quiet and simple, and just capture what's needed to be captured, to meet any compliance requirements, depending on the sector you're in, perhaps, and just to have some record of that can be useful for future reference. But keep it light touch, it would be our sense. And so as we come to design processes and systems, that's a design ethos that we would follow very strongly. Again, I've had some challenges in moving forward, but I'm there now. Thanks, Richard. So let's just consider then this term of continuous feedback. So we say, yes, of course, there should be plenty of it. There should be feedback happening. It should be timely. It should be, sort of regularly delivered. It should be useful to help people track and tack in terms of what they're doing and what they're delivering. But it's not an either or with performance appraisals. We see continuous feedback as being continuous feedback and performance appraisals. They're not mutually exclusive. So get the basics of a robust performance appraisal process in place first. Don't ditch it. Do it well. Have that as a conversation which is aimed at reflection and learning. That moment where people step out and genuinely look back and consider in a much more measured way how they might do things differently going forward. And then build from there. You can then, with that almost robust foundation in place, you can certainly then improve things by delivering feedback. And you can improve how that feedback's delivering. Let's not lose the learning from what we said earlier about neuroscience and the SCARF model, for example. We could apply the learning from that. Perhaps a simple example might be, we can give autonomy to an individual as to when they request the feedback, say at the end of a significant event, as we've described here, or project or whatever. So you can give some degree of control to people so they feel they can draw that feedback down, knowing that they're going to value it and knowing they're going to do it, because they want it. Keep it timely, as you said, keep it key, short and sweet, simple, well-formed questions each time that you might use repeatedly. So it becomes a consistency to it and a consistent expectation of what that conversation would look like. What went well? What would you do differently? What now? And of course, what now is a great question just to say, keep it forward looking. The feedback and the review of what's been happening is a means to an end. It's all about then helping that person do better in the future. And support it through a meaningful conversation. So don't just ping, tweet, zing the feedback using technology. You can certainly capture it that way, but have a conversation. Just a great way to ensure that feedback is taken on, that it's handled, reduce sensitivity, and genuinely that the individual has a chance to discuss it and make most use of it, and so derive maximum value for them and, of course, for the organisation as well. And Richard, if I ask you to move forward again one more slide for me, it should be a word on technology.
That's up now.
Great. So just as I led off there, technology, we would say, should be a means to a desired end. It should be all enabling your abilities to respond to this generation, the millennial generation, to their desire for feedback, for their desire to have robust performance management in place, including appraisals. And certainly we can take advantage of the technology. We can take advantage of mobile apps to make it easy to request feedback, for people to give feedback in a timely way. That's just a very neat way of capturing it efficiently. But we would say always start from the human element first, the human side of feedback, which is understanding how best then to deliver that feedback, discuss that feedback, make it useful to that individual, just thinking about the person at the other end. And if you start from there and work back and then see how the technology will help you deliver that, that's great. We don't simply want to be efficient at the sake of effectiveness. We don't simply want to make a poor process go faster. We can do both. Again, we don't have to have either or here. We can bring these together. So, if we come through,
It's on the summary now, John.
Yeah, that's great. So in summary, and then we'll throw out to some more conversation and questions, obviously. So we should recognise the changes that are afoot and the implications on the workplace, and how we as line managers and leaders can sort of tap into that potential that we have in this next generation of the workforce. They're very comfortable with feedback. They want it, and they can make great use of it. They're really adept at being able to develop off the back of it, improve their performance off the back of it, and achieve great things. So we need to respond to that. How to do that then? We would say we need to get the right foundations in place and then build. So well-designed performance management process. Look at it. Just see, are we clear on the aims of the process? Do we have then the things in place that help us deliver that in a robust way? Are we having clear objectives set? Are we having feedback conversations? Are we having coaching conversations? And do we have an appraisal conversation as well that ties that? And then around you go again. They all have a very defined purpose. and it's getting that in place and executing it well is a tremendous starting point. And let's get beyond the drama. The EU referendum-like drama sometimes I think that we would see to say we don't think appraisals need to die, be chucked out. We think millennials can resuscitate these with their thirst for feedback and just that clarity they want on what's going well for them and what they might do differently. So if we start doing it in the way it was intended, do it well, then appraisals then just have that important moment where people stop, they pause, they step out of that busy stream, they reflect, they learn, and then they re-engage, and off they go again, and then it's into the run of the operational day-to-day. I'm going to sort of begin to draw to a close. Now, again, in terms of the 45 minutes, I'll just come back one slide there, just on that summary thing, but maybe just... I've got a question. What are the results of the poll? Do you mean the EU referendum poll or the thing? I think it was about 50-50. I think, Richard, it was about 53, 40, 53, 53, 46 or something. Or, again, there's a percentage out there.
54% said no. Yeah,
no,
they weren't considering ditching it.
Hadn't stopped or considering. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And the others. So maybe before I get to the final thanks, just throw that open. Any questions, any concluding thoughts or insights from people? I hope it's obviously been interesting. It's provided some food for thought and maybe is playing into things that you're wrestling with and thinking about yourselves. But Richard, shall I just